World War II brought unspeakable horrors to millions across Europe, with concentration camps becoming infamous for the atrocities committed there. Among those responsible for these crimes were the commandants, men entrusted with overseeing the inhumane conditions and systematic persecution. After the war, many were brought to justice, their actions exposed in trials that horrified the world. One such figure was Carl Peter Berg, whose cruelty toward prisoners led to his eventual execution by firing squad in 1949, years after the war had ended. Born on April 18, 1907, Carl Peter Berg had an ordinary upbringing, much like many of his contemporaries. There were no clear signs in his early years that he would become one of the war's most ruthless figures. However, like millions in Germany, he was drawn to the ideology of Adolf Hitler and the Nazi Party during its rise in the 1920s and 1930s. The Nazi Party promised a vision of national strength and unity, appealing to those who felt disillusioned after World War I and the economic instability that followed. Berg was captivated by this rhetoric, officially joining the party before the outbreak of World War II. He also became a member of the SS, the paramilitary organization that served as Hitler's elite force. Initially formed to protect Nazi leaders, the SS grew into a vast organization responsible for maintaining order in concentration camps and executing the regime's brutal policies. Under the leadership of Heinrich Himmler, the SS became infamous for its role in the Holocaust, with members like Carl Peter Berg playing pivotal roles in the suffering of countless victims. In May 1940, Germany invaded the Netherlands, and the Dutch people soon experienced the full force of Nazi rule. Cities such as Rotterdam faced heavy bombing, and within days, the Dutch army surrendered to avoid further bloodshed. Life under occupation became increasingly difficult as the Nazis imposed harsh laws, food shortages worsened, and starvation became widespread. As part of their oppressive measures, the Nazis targeted certain groups within Dutch society, particularly Jews. Many were rounded up and sent to transit camps, where they awaited transport to larger concentration camps like Auschwitz and Bergen-Belsen. It was in this context that Carl Peter Berg became a key figure in the Nazi regime's machinery of oppression. Berg was assigned to Camp Skurl, a transit camp in the Netherlands that had originally been a Dutch military site. Under Berg's command, the camp became a place of misery and despair. Prisoners were held in appalling conditions, with little food, no sanitation, and rampant disease. Though Skurl was primarily a transit camp, the treatment of prisoners was harsh. Jewish individuals, resistance fighters, and prisoners of war were briefly held here before being sent to notorious death camps like Mauthausen and Buchenwald. Later, Berg was transferred to Camp Amersfoort, which became infamous under his leadership. Initially, he served as deputy commandant, but when his superior fell ill, Berg took full control. At Amersfoort, his cruelty escalated. He oversaw the mistreatment and execution of thousands of prisoners, many of whom were Soviet POWs. Amersfoort held around 37,000 prisoners during the war. Although the death rate at this camp was lower than at some larger concentration camps, the suffering endured by the inmates was immense. Prisoners were subjected to forced labor, malnutrition, and violence from the guards, who acted with impunity. Berg was known for his sadistic behavior. During roll calls, he would patrol the prisoners, searching for anyone who failed to stand perfectly still or who dared to speak. Those who caught his attention were dragged away to be tortured or executed. One of Berg's most notorious decisions was to deprive prisoners of basic necessities during winter. Soviet prisoners, in particular, were given no clothing or food and were left to freeze to death. Those deemed unfit to work were executed in the nearby forest, their lives extinguished in the most brutal manner. Former prisoners described Amersfoort as a hell on earth, with guards enforcing a regime of terror. Children who witnessed the prisoners being marched to the camp described the despair in their eyes, knowing they were saying goodbye to the outside world. Berg also appointed like-minded officers, such as Joseph Kotala, who enacted further cruelty. Kotala cancelled meals for Christmas, forced prisoners to stand in the snow for hours, and deprived them of Red Cross packages. Under Berg's watch, this culture of brutality flourished. As the tide of World War II turned against Germany, many SS officers fled to avoid capture and prosecution. Berg, however, was quickly arrested after the war ended in 1945. Ironically, he was held as a prisoner in the same camp he once commanded. By this time, the horrors of the concentration camps were widely known, and Berg's reputation as a brutal commandant ensured he would face trial. In 1949, 4 years after the war, Carl Peter Berg stood trial in the Netherlands. Evidence of his crimes was overwhelming, and witnesses recounted the atrocities committed under his command. The court sentenced him to death, recognizing the immense suffering he had caused. On November 22, 1949, at the age of 42, Berg was brought to a firing range at Fort Bijlmer to face his execution. He showed no remorse for his actions, maintaining a cold demeanor until the end. Berg's final moments were marked by defiance. As he was tied to a stake and the firing squad prepared their rifles, he shouted, "Fire!" His last words before the soldiers pulled their triggers. His death marked the end of a man whose actions symbolized the darkest chapters of human history. Carl Peter Berg's story is a stark reminder of the atrocities committed during World War II and the need for accountability. While his execution could never undo the suffering he caused, it served as a powerful statement that such crimes would not go unpunished. The memory of those who suffered in camps like Amersfoort lives on, and the pursuit of justice continues to inspire efforts to ensure such horrors are never repeated.